Good evening. Welcome once again to Her Story in the Making, presented by Women of Fantasy Football, powered by Fantasy Alarm. I am your host, Britt Flinn, and tonight we are joined with the Diva of Devy, Katie Flower. Katie, how are you doing tonight?
I'm great, Britt. Thanks for having me on here. I'm excited.
I'm just so excited to have you and pick your brain. And you're so knowledgeable in all aspects, it seems, of so many sports and have done so many things. I'm really excited to talk to you. But before we dive into that, you're wearing your Arkansas shirt. You are the first Arkansas fan that I've had on here. How do you feel about Arkansas taking or knocking off number one Kansas, knocking off a number one seed for the second time in 2 years? I mean, what is that moment like for you?
It's a wonderful feeling, and I'm trying not to get too far ahead of my skis, but I really do believe this team can beat anybody. They've proven it by beating themselves so many times, but it's just nice to see that they're starting to peak, it looks like, at the right moment, and I'm just super, super excited.
They really are. And Devo's comments and his post-game interview, you had to be heartless to not feel emotional with that. I mean, seriously. But you're not originally from Arkansas. So let's get into how you became an Arkansas fan, and how you went to Woo Pig Suey.
Okay. Well, I'm originally from Vermont, and as you can tell just from the name of the state, there's more cows than people, and there's no good D1 college baseball, basketball, and football. I've always been a big fan of all three major sports. I moved to Texas in 2005 for my job, and my territory was Arkansas, Texas, Louisiana, and Oklahoma. So I was a free agent looking for a team that I could support. And I wanted to find a team that was kind of an underdog, that the fans had to be good fans and good people first and foremost. So that ruled out LSU like right away. And the Texas teams, I just really couldn't get into the Longhorns. I couldn't get into the Aggies. There's just so many different reasons why I didn't like any of the Texas teams. Oklahoma State, nah. I fell in love with the Razorbacks. I love their fans. I love their mascot and just the enthusiasm for the sports program, and fell in love with all three sports. I really love our coaches now, more so than I did when I first became a fan. I really think that we've got things going.
I do too. And, having Hunter Yurachek come in there and just completely take control over this system. I mean, we're powerhouses in also all the big three, but
Yes.
Also in track and field and in so many of the women's sports, like women's softball, gymnastics, basketball. It's just crazy. And it's so fun to be a fan of the Razorbacks. But you're not only a fan of the Razorbacks, you've been a fan of sports and many different types of sports your entire life. You didn't necessarily grow up in a home of crazy sports fans. So how did you get involved in sports, and how did that kind of evolve to fantasy football?
Right. So my dad did like baseball. He liked the Red Sox, and he would drive us down. It was about a 4.5 hour drive, pack up all the kids in the station wagon. I'm one of 6 children, and mom would never go because she didn't trust dad's driving and she didn't like sports at all. And none of my siblings really like sports, but every now and again I could convince dad to drive down to Fenway and we'd watch a ball game. But I would play with my neighbors. I'd be shooting hoops until dark hours. Mom would be yelling, "Time for supper, come on in." And so I played, sandlot baseball with the guys. I was a second baseman, and they loved playing with me because one of the big guys hit a line drive right into my belly. I stopped the ball. I threw him out at first before I collapsed crying. And so, I was tough. I was competitive. They let me play quarterback on the slush football team and just a regular pickup football. I played hockey with the boys. We had frozen over tennis courts so we could play hockey. It was just rural Vermont. For me, sports was life.
And hockey is such a brutal sport. To hear you say that you've played hockey, I mean, I had to sing the national anthem at a hockey game once and had a panic attack just stepping on the ice because I thought I was going to fall, let alone getting out there on ice skates and playing with the boys. That is some seriously impressive stuff. Well, and Toronto Dave agrees. He's like, hockey, yes.
Yeah, Toronto Dave, he's one of my boys. So hi, big shout out. happy to see you, and all the people that are putting notes, dropping notes in the chat. Hey to everybody. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, we love our fans. They're literally the best. But we kind of mentioned that you had moved on to coaching after, your childhood days of playing. How did your coaching experience kind of help you in your fantasy football analytics?
I've always had a pretty good eye for talent. And so the coaching helped develop that. And I also umpired and refereed every single sport that I coached. I coached boys baseball, basketball, and football. And I love the strategy of the games. I think that's why I love sports so much, because every game is different. The matchups are different. The strategy, it doesn't matter whether it's baseball or football, any of the sports. So I think that just knowing the nuances of what you're looking for a good route runner, and running backs and quarterbacks, especially the footwork. And footwork is so important in every sport, but especially as a quarterback in football. So I can see things a little bit better, I think, because I was a coach when I watched them at whether it's the scouting combine, or I've been to the Senior Bowl several times. Thankfully, it's been one of the perks of being a podcast host. So I've gotten to go to some pretty cool games because of it too.
And I'm going to throw kind of a curveball. You mentioned the scouting combine. You have what is called a steak ass rating. Can you tell us a little bit about the steak ass rating?
So that's one of the things that I scout in Devy. And with Devy, that's developmental players. So you can draft a kid that's a freshman incoming freshman in college. You haven't even seen him play college football. I don't want a running back that's only 165 pounds or 180 pounds. Chances are very good they're not going to put on the kind of weight that they need to be a bell cow running back in the NFL. I want a running back that's got a steak ass. And so you got to have the thick thighs and the low center of gravity. But that became the big, if he's got a prime steak ass as a freshman, then chances are good that he's a prospect I'm looking at.
And Omega King says steak ass rating legendary.
Yeah, he's one of my boys. What's up, Omega?
Which is so true. I mean, you really don't want those small guys because, for one, the running backs get injured so often they can't push through those big guys. I think the terminology of steak ass is absolutely chef's kiss. But diving into fantasy football a little bit, you've been playing fantasy for a while now. And you have a pretty interesting story about how you first got started in your very first league. So can you tell us a little bit about how that started and how it developed further on down the line?
Sure. So I was big into reality TV, Survivor especially, but Amazing Race, Big Brother, all of those. And in Florida, in Orlando, they had Hearts of Reality, which is a charity event every year. And I got to know the host, the guy that put it on. I helped out. I volunteered. So I got a free ticket to be able to attend. I've met and partied with over 100 people who've been on the show Survivor. Some of them are really good friends of mine, in fact, now. But prior to the 2012 fantasy football season, Mike, the guy who was hosting, he had someone drop out of his redraft league and asked me at the last minute, like 2 days before the draft, I know you love sports. Would you be interested in fantasy football? I said, I've never played, but let me look. Let me see what the resources are out there. If I can get ready for the draft, I'm in. And it was free, so why not? And I get to play with a bunch of the people that I know and like, the survivors. So the draft was on Sunday. I had a couple days to get ready. I was reading the Draft Day Manifesto by Matthew Berry. And unfortunately, it was bad advice, and I drafted a really bad team. I don't think I won any games, and there's no trading in redraft. So it was a little bit frustrating, but I liked it enough that in the off season, I participated in almost 100 mock drafts, and I did a whole bunch of free ESPN leagues and Yahoo just so that I could get the art of drafting down and know who was available at what ADP and which positions were the most coveted. So the second year I did much better, and I played in many different leagues. And then in 2014, as I'm sitting there in chat, I heard one of the people talking about a dynasty league, and that you can trade and you can draft rookies. And it was all, I was like, oh, you have an orphan I'm your person, and I joined that league, and the rest is HERstory.
I love that. And I love also that you didn't quit the first time that, you played and just didn't exactly do that well. And sometimes that's a mix of luck because players go down with bad injuries all the time. Sometimes it's just the luck of the draw. But I think that that's a real compliment to your competitive nature and how much you love sports. And I think that's really cool. Were you at all intimidated by the dynasty aspect, or did you completely dive in aside from redraft? You were like, no, this is my jam. This is what I want.
Oh, I knew immediately dynasty was my jam because of, like they said, you got trading, you got rookies, you can scout college players and draft. At that point, I wasn't into Devy. I didn't know anything about Devy, but I knew that with dynasty, you got to keep those players. So the better you were at scouting the talent, whether they're rookies or just players in general, the better chance that I would have. And I started playing for money, like immediately. And that is another great incentive. I think in 2014, I had something like 15 dynasty teams, and then it expanded. I think at the most at my peak was 54 dynasty leagues. And yeah, and a few redraft. I still compete in a few redraft every year, but I dove in head first.
You are a monster. 54 dynasty leagues. That is machine level. That is like Terminator level.
It's back down to 18 now. So it's all back, either commissioners let the league expire, or I just had to finally start to weed it down a little bit.
Yeah, 54 is just an insane number. But I imagine that led into the formation of your nickname, the Diva of Devy. So can you tell me a little bit how that started and how that came along?
After my first full year of dynasty in 2015, heading into that off season, I knew I wanted to get involved in more dynasty leagues. I tried some IDP formats and I tried an auction. And then I learned about Devy and I was like, you know what? I love college football. I watch a lot of college football. I got a buddy who is a Georgia Bulldog fan. So both SEC Razorbacks and the Georgia Bulldogs. And this was many years ago, before Georgia won back-to-back championships, but they were still good and they were really good at churning out running backs. And Todd Gurley had my attention. He was my first ever Devy pick. Worked out great, at least for the first few years till he got injured. But I got involved with Devy in year 2 of dynasty, and I love that even more than just straight dynasty. If I ever do any more startups, it's got to be a Devy league.
Well, I have a personal vendetta against Todd Gurley because the first time I drafted him in redraft, I had the number 1 overall pick, and then he crapped the bed. It was the year he got hurt. But that's why you have the advantage over people like me, because you grab him and realize his potential when he's early on in his career. I'm just looking at historical stats, and it doesn't always work out that way sometimes. So props to you for recognizing his early talent. But tell us how you got into the space by actually becoming a fantasy contributor and how you began co-hosting the UTH podcast.
So after Matthew Berry let me down, and I only had a couple days to prep for that redraft draft, I did a lot of off-season research. And when I first learned about Dynasty, I Googled Dynasty leagues and information. And one of the sites that I found, one of the podcasts I found, was Under the Helmet. I loved listening to Chad and Doug. It was a free podcast. It's still a free podcast today. And they had a real good rapport with each other. And then I started becoming a subscriber to their website. And because of that, I could email Chad questions and he would email me back. He was very friendly. He would answer all my questions. And then one day he happened to mention on the show that I was becoming one of his favorite fans, that, we talked strategy back and forth. And Doug's like, well, she should write an article for the website. And I never even had dawned on me or occurred to me to do that until I heard him mention that. And I was like, you know what? So I submitted an article to Chad and he published it. And then I waited a couple weeks and submitted another one. And then we started talking. He had me on as a guest 2 or 3 times. And then Doug ended up retiring. And Chad asked me if I would take over and be his co-host. And I said, absolutely. And that's how I became co-host in 2015 of Under the Helmet.
Did you have any experience at all about writing articles or podcasting or anything? Or did you just let your knowledge of sports kind of carry you and you were like, I can do this?
I was a DJ in college, so I am very comfortable around a microphone. I have written commercial articles for work, technical articles for work, and I've written flash fiction and poetry. So I've been a writer my whole life as well. It was just a perfect mix to podcasting. I even said to Chad, I said, not only was I a DJ in college, but I announced hockey games. I got to be the announcer when my fiance at the time was a high school hockey coach. And so I got to be the announcer. So I wasn't afraid of the microphone. I absolutely love the format, and having Chad ask me to be the co-host, there's been so many benefits from that ever since as well.
No, it really sounds like you were just made for this platform. Like, no fear, you know your stuff. Let's go in, let's do everything. And again, your personality, becoming a listener, and then jumping onto a co-host just speaks volumes about you as a person. So this next question is probably going to be a little more tough since I didn't know that you were involved in all of those background stories, but what is your favorite kind of content to produce out of all of those? And if you had a choice, what would you pick?
I'd pick podcasting mainly because you can really get my sense of humor, and you have to be like with Chad. He didn't have any show sheets. We would go off the cuff every single podcast. And I love that. I love the challenge, not knowing what the questions were ahead of time, going into it blind. I've been a guest on many other people's podcasts through the years, and they usually send me a show sheet and they give me some things that they want me to talk about. That's kind of cool. Hey, I got time to prep for this. Wow. As opposed to with podcasting with Chad, it was just thinking by the seat of my pants and coming up with stuff. So I like podcasting because I can really just be me, and that's it.
Well, you do have the best personality for podcasting. I envy your ability to think on the fly because I cannot. I definitely need to prep. But it takes all kinds in this space, and you're one of the reasons that we all enjoy podcasting. But you've done so much throughout the course of your career. Is there a favorite moment in particular that you kind of just enjoyed personally, or made you think that I made it?
Yeah, there's been so many great moments, Britt, but the one that I cherish the most, and it started at the Senior Bowl. Jamal Williams, I got to interview him at the Senior Bowl. He weighed in at 211. I thought he was a little bit light for his position. He was very much a receiver at BYU, so he had the chops. And I got the chance to interview him. And then a year later at the Fantasy Football Expo, Jamal Williams is there. And I had asked him, one of the questions I had asked him in my interview was, how much weight do you want to put on between the Senior Bowl and the NFL Combine? And his answer to me at the time was, oh, I don't need to add any weight. I'm fine just the way I am. And his college weight, it had said 218, 220 in that range. So the 211 was a little bit light. And I was a little bit concerned for him as far as, will he be the bell cow type back in the NFL? So when I ran into him a year later at the Fantasy Football Expo in Dallas, he was up on stage with Patrick Mahomes, Ronald Jones, who had just been drafted in round 2 of the NFL draft. And so Ronald Jones is all cocky and swagger and all this. And as Jamal Williams is coming out on stage, he was a 4th round draft pick. And I'm yelling, Jamal Williams, Jamal Williams. And he had this big grin on his face, like nobody's yelling for Patrick Mahomes or Ronald Jones. And somebody's yelling for me, and she's right there in the front row. So at a break, I went up to him and I said, do you remember me? He goes, yes, ma'am. And I said, I met you at the Senior Bowl. He says, yes, ma'am. And I said, I interviewed you. He goes, yes, ma'am. And that's all he kept saying was, yes, ma'am, yes, ma'am. And so then I said, do you remember the question that I asked you about how much weight do you want to gain between now and the NFL Combine? And you told me none. And he had this little wry grin, so cute. And he goes, "Yes, ma'am." And I said, "What did you do this off season after year 1 in the NFL?" He goes, "I put on 8 pounds." Playing at 224. So thankfully, the man did do what he needed to. And look at him now. Like, he's just, I look forward to watching him play some more. That was so much fun.
Well, so not only are you a DJ, a writer, a coach, an athlete, a referee, and an announcer and podcaster, like Coop said, I think after that story, we have to add life coach to your resume because that story is absolutely incredible. And Dave agrees. That story is absolutely amazing. And Jamal Williams is a character, but for you to tell that story and kind of embody his personality is just, that's so amazing and so fun that you got to do that. I always try to transition at this point just because there have been so many good moments, but as women in sports, there are always challenges that we face. There are always hurdles that we have to overcome, whether we are playing sports, whether we're analyzing sports, whether we're coaching sports. So I want to know what challenges you faced early in your career, not only being new to the space, but specifically a woman in a male-dominated field.
I work in a male-dominated field. I'm in construction, so I've been in commercial doors and hardware for 38 plus years. I'm used to working with guys. One of the things that I've found, it doesn't matter who you are, if you prove yourself with the way that you talk and the way that you approach good and bad, they're going to respect you and look at you as an equal. So I haven't had a ton of challenges per se, but a couple funny stories. One time when I was refereeing football, it was 7th and 8th grade tackle football. One of the coaches was saying, "Hey, honey.
Oh, God.
Yeah, trying to get my attention. And I ignored him. I just kept running up and down the sidelines. And he goes, "Hey, ref." And I stopped and I said, "Yes." And then I acknowledged him. So there was that time. Nobody ever came. They came to my first ever football practice, the 5th and 6th grade. I was coaching flag to start with, then to tackle the second. But the first time I coached football, a lot of the parents already knew me from coaching basketball and baseball, but a lot of them came to the very first practice. They never came to another practice after they saw how well I handled practice, how hard I worked the kids, how much I motivated them. And so that was cool. I've had some guys in dynasty leagues that have been a little bit chauvinistic. And when they find out that I'm a woman, because I use the name Skylar a lot, because it's kind of, you don't know if it's a guy or a girl. It could be either. And then I don't have to worry about them wondering, am I a good trader because I'm a guy or whatever? But I have had some league mates be chauvinistic toward me when they found out that I was a woman. They're like, "Oh, well, no wonder you won't trade. Women tend to hang on to their players way longer than others." I'm like, "You're whatever." And so thankfully it's been few and far between.
But I think it still does speak to the level of things that we have to deal with and how much further we have to go, even though we've made so many strides in this space, that there are still people out there with your resume, especially, who still treat women that way in that space. So we're thankful that you're here and you're just crushing it because you're proving all the doubters wrong. And we love that. If anybody in the chat has any questions for Katie, please throw them in there. We've got about 5 more minutes before we're going to call it, which I don't know where the time has gone. We've had so much fun. But Katie, what advice would you give others trying to create a career in fantasy sports, or what do you wish you knew when you started?
I would say just work hard and be yourself. You can't be anybody but yourself. Whatever you are, bring that to the table. I love Casey Kasem because she's so real. And I love Stefania Bell and listening to her. And there's so many great women in this space. And everyone that I know is real. And that's my advice. Just be yourself.
I love that so much, especially being a former pageant queen with quotation marks. But, growing up in Arkansas, it's kind of something that you learn to mask. And it's really hard to break down that mask when you're in that kind of society. So that is some of the best advice that I've ever heard. And I always try to take away a piece of advice in these interviews. And that one is going to be the one that I jot down from this one today. But since this show is called HERstory in the Making, we want to know a little bit about how you see your story continuing and just some goals that you're setting for yourself in the space over the next few years.
Well, I just retired at the end of the season from being a full-time co-host of Under the Helmet. I still intend to be a guest. I was just a guest with Chad talking some rookies after the NFL Combine. I've been on the Rookie Fever show. I'll chop it up with anybody that wants a guest speaker, whether it's just a straight Devy show or Dynasty Fantasy Football. I'm happy to guest. But between work and I just moved in with my boyfriend, and I'm probably 5 to 10 years away from retirement, I'm starting a new venture, kind of a new venture. I've always loved to cook. I've always loved to garden. I make my own cheese. I make my own pasta. And so I'm starting a website called Kate's Kitchen on how to eat healthy on a budget, teaching the average Joe cook how to repurpose leftovers so they don't taste the same and you don't get sick of it, and how to just eat a little bit healthier. It's not just a once in a lifetime, I'm going to eat healthy this one day. It's how to make it a lifetime habit so that you feel better and you have more energy and that kind of thing. So I'm definitely going to still be around. I'm playing in still a lot of dynasty leagues, but my goal, my ambition is to be the best guest that I can be when I'm asked to be, and be the best woman for my man and for the website, for the cooking website that I'm going to make.
Well, as if you needed more to add to your resume. Now you're this chef, you're this life guru, even more so than a life coach. Coop says, wait, you make your own cheese? We need another hour. And I would tune into that. Absolutely. I grew up on a farm and I still don't even know how to make my own cheese. Wendy says,
sounds like you need
cool.
to come on down. You need to come on down and visit and I'll teach you.
Yes. Dave says, I love that idea. I think you were just such an interesting person with so many talents and so much to offer this world. We're so excited to see what this has to offer. And all you guys out there playing in leagues with Katie, don't sleep on her. Don't send all this women don't like to trade BS, because she will ruin you. So if we have any more questions, throw them in the chat. But before we go, tell people where they can find you. Sorry, I got so overwhelmed about the cheese thing and about the cooking and leftover thing. I'm just like, my mind is literally blown right now.
Well, that's okay. I want to share one more thing before
please do.
Where they can find me. So what Toronto Dave just posted in the chat just reminded me of it. He said the resume will be shorter of what Katie doesn't do. And a lot of people will ask me, what can't you do? And the answer is I can't pee standing up without making a mess. That's always my pat answer. So I've just been blessed in so many different ways, and I'm so thankful. But you can find me on Twitter at FF_Skyler399. I am the Diva of Devy. You'll find me on Under the Helmet as a from time to time guest and Rookie Fever, and just watch Twitter. If you follow me on Twitter, you'll see me retweet any podcasts that I am guest on.
You were such a queen. I'm so impressed by this interview. I'm so glad that we had you on. Look forward to everything that you do in the future. And I am definitely going to subscribe to your blog, your homemaking podcast, because I can cook, but I can't make cheese. Are you kidding me? I want to make some cheese.
And best of all, it's going to be a free website for anybody. It's going to have all kinds of recipes. There's going to be all kinds of stories, video, written. It's just something I've been building for the last 12 years, building pictures of what I cook and all that just to get ready.
Even better, guys, if you thought that this 30-minute interview was good, just wait till Katie starts telling real, like, in-depth stories on her blog. Y'all do not want to miss that. Katie, thank you so much. You've been an absolute pleasure. Guys, thank you for tuning in. Again, brain blown, can't talk right now. Join us again in 2 weeks, same time, same channel, and we will see you next time.